Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 17th. Today we are reading together from 1 Samuel chapters 3 and 4. 1 Samuel chapters 3 and 4, which is going to give us in chapter 3 the calling of Samuel as the prophet of Yahweh. And then chapter 4 is going to look at the next progression in the story, which unfortunately for Israel is not good. We're going to see some very ill-advised tactical decisions for the people as they battle against the Philistines. And we're going to see the very unfortunate consequences that come as a result of these very poor decisions being made. So let me get the text up on the screen for us, and we will read along together here in Judges, in 1 Samuel, in chapters 3 and 4. 1 Samuel chapters 3 and 4. Quick recap. First Samuel, introduced to Samuel. His mother Hannah prays for him, prays that God might give her a son that she could then dedicate into priestly service. He does that, and he blesses her. She turns around and blesses God with the service of her son. Chapter 2 introduces us to the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, and they are not good people. They're terrible, in fact. They take what belongs to Yahweh, and then they also take the women that work at the entrance into the meeting and have inappropriate sexual relations with them. Unfortunately, things are not going to get too much better in chapter 4 whenever they're introduced again, and that's going to come as a result of Yahweh's telling Eli that a very unfortunate future is awaiting him coming up. So we're going to see a lot, especially in chapter 4, that is a fulfillment of what was promised back in chapter 2. So keep that in mind. Maybe scratch a note there that this is a fulfillment of what had already been stated. So reading together here then in 1 Samuel chapter 3, all along the way, as Eli's sons are terrible, we see that Samuel, he's a good young man. He's a good boy, and he does well before Yahweh. He even wears the little linen ephod. He serves Yahweh. He's growing in favor with God and men. Again, of course, echoes of Jesus. And we're going to see him continue to progress here. A lot of positives from the standpoint of Samuel. Not a lot of positives elsewhere, though. So reading together here, 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse number 1. The boy Samuel served Yahweh in Eli's presence. And in those days, the word of Yahweh was rare, and prophetic visions were not widespread. I wonder why. Think about why. Verse number 2, one day Eli, whose eyesight was failing, was lying in his usual place. Before the lamp of God had gone out, Samuel was lying down in the temple of Yahweh where the ark of God was located. Then Yahweh called Samuel, and he answered, "Here I am." He ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." "I didn't call." Eli replied, "Go back and lie down." So Samuel went and lay down. Once again, Yahweh called Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli, and said, "Here I am. You called me." "I didn't call, my son." Eli replied, "Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know Yahweh, because the word of Yahweh had not yet been revealed to him. Once again, for the third time, Yahweh called Samuel. He got up, went to Eli, and said, "Here I am. You called me." Then Eli understood that Yahweh was calling the boy. He told Samuel, "Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Yahweh, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Yahweh came, stood there, and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel responded, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Yahweh said to Samuel, "I'm about to do something in Israel that will cause everyone who hears about it to shudder. On that day, I will carry out against Eli everything I said about his family." Again, this referencing chapter 2, from beginning to end. "I told him that I'm going to judge his family forever because of the iniquity he knows about. His sons are cursing God, and he has not stopped them. Therefore, I have sworn to Eli's family, the iniquity of Eli's family will never be wiped out by either sacrifice or offering." Samuel lay down until the morning. Then he opened the doors of Yahweh's house. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called him and said, "Samuel, my son." "Here I am," answered Samuel. "What was the message he gave you?" Eli asked. "Don't hide it from me. May God punish you severely, and may God punish you and do so severely if you hide anything from me that he told you?" So Samuel told him everything and did not hide anything from him. Eli responded, "He is Yahweh. Let him do what he thinks is good." Samuel grew, Yahweh was with him, and he fulfilled everything Samuel prophesied. All Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a confirmed prophet of Yahweh. And Yahweh continued to appear in Shiloh because there he revealed himself to Samuel by his word. And Samuel's words came to all Israel. Now, starting where chapter 4 probably should start, Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped at Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped at Aphek. The Philistines lined up in battle formation against Israel, and as the battle intensified, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who struck down about 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the troops returned to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did Yahweh defeat us today before the Philistines? Let's bring the ark of Yahweh's covenant from Shiloh. Then it will go with us and save us from our enemies." So the people sent men to Shiloh to bring back the ark of the covenant of Yahweh of armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of Yahweh entered the camp, all the Israelites raised such a loud shout that the ground shook. The Philistines heard the sound of the war cry and asked, "What's this loud shout in the Hebrews' camp?" When the Philistines discovered that the ark of Yahweh had entered the camp, they panicked. "A god has entered their camp," they said. "Woe to us! Nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who will rescue us from these magnificent gods? These are the gods that slaughtered the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Show courage, men, and be men, Philistines. Otherwise, you'll serve the Hebrews just as they served you. Now be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and each man fled to his tent. The slaughter was severe. 30,000 of the Israelite foot soldiers fell. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. The same day, a Benjaminite man ran from the battle and came to Shiloh. His clothes were torn, and there was dirt on his head. When he arrived, there was Eli sitting on the chair beside the road waiting, because he was anxious about the ark of God. When the man entered the city to give a report, the entire city cried out. Eli heard the outcry and asked, "Why this commotion?" The man quickly came and reported to Eli. At that time, Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes didn't move because he couldn't see. The man said to Eli, "I'm the one who came from the battlefield. I fled from there today." "What happened, my son?" Eli asked. The messenger answered, "Israel has fled from the Philistines, and also there was a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are both dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off the chair by the city gate, and since he was old and heavy, his neck broke and he died. Eli had judged Israel 40 years. Eli's daughter-in-law, the son of Phinehas, was pregnant and about to give birth. When she heard the news about the capture of God's ark and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband, she collapsed and gave birth because her labor pains came on her. As she was dying, the women taking care of her said, "Don't be afraid, you're giving birth to a son." But she didn't pay attention she did not respond or pay attention. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," referring to the capture of the ark of God and to the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. "The glory has departed from Israel," she said, "because the ark of God has been captured." And that is 1 Samuel chapters 3 and 4. The story progresses. We're continuing to see the vital role that Samuel is being set up to play within the story of Israel during this time period. Again, don't forget, this is taking place sometime probably towards the ending portion of the Judges time frame. So we should not be surprised, number one, to see Philistines. Number two, we should not be surprised for people to be making bad decisions. But before we get there, here's Samuel, and here's a lot of faith within the story. Now, we want to note, first of all, what is said in verse number 1. Again, this shows us the time frame of the judges. In those days, the word of Yahweh was rare, and prophetic visions were not widespread. There was within the town, within the land, well, someone once wrote, there was no prophet without a prophet. They were not benefited without hearing the word of Yahweh, and they were not hearing the word of Yahweh because nobody wanted to listen to the word of Yahweh. Yet here is one who is willing to listen. Here is one in Samuel who is ready to be set up to play an important role as being the prophet of Yahweh within the land. We go through this whole spiel, or this whole scene, I should say, probably would be a better way to say it. This scene, or these number of scenes where Yahweh calls out to Samuel. He goes to Eli, says, Eli, you called me. But of course, it wasn't Eli calling him. Eli, the text tells us, his eyesight was failing, so he was not as sharp as he should have been physically, and I believe spiritually as well. His mind wasn't quite as sharp as it needed to be spiritual wise, which is why he didn't recognize what was going on until it happened finally for a third time. And he says, hey, this is Yahweh calling you. You need to lie down whenever he calls you. Say, I'm ready to listen. Your servant is ready to listen to you, and you will hear what you need to hear. At this time, verse number 7 tells us, the narrator gives us the comment that Samuel did not yet know Yahweh. This is not the same way, I believe, though, from what we see in chapter 2 and verse 12 concerning the way Eli's sons did not know Yahweh. They did not know Yahweh because they had rejected Yahweh. They had abandoned loyalty to the covenants. But Eli was just a young boy. He was not experienced yet to know Yahweh in this way. But now that Yahweh reaches out to him, this relationship between Yahweh and his prophet is being established. Now, you got to think, for this young man, and we don't know exactly how long this is. He's probably still a young-ish man. I'm going to assume. I could be wrong about that. But we're going to say he's a young man of some age. The very first message he hears from Yahweh is, I'm about to bring disaster and punishment upon your mentor. Again, that's probably not a good message you want to hear, which is, again, totally understandable why Samuel didn't want to tell Eli what was said. But Eli pressed him, said, you have to, under the threat of curse, you have to tell me what's going on. And Samuel does. And to Eli's credit, he submitted to the words of Yahweh. He submitted to them. He is Yahweh. Let him do what he thinks is good. So Samuel grows. Yahweh is with him. He fulfilled everything Samuel prophesied. So not only would this be, again, we got to think of prophecy in terms of way it's put to us in scripture. It's not always foretelling. It is often forthtelling. That the prophet is speaking the words of Yahweh. The prophet is speaking the words Yahweh wants him to speak to the hearer, so that they can understand the perspective of Yahweh. Yahweh sees things from his heavenly throne differently than we see things with our material eyes. We, just like Samuel, or just like Eli, and whenever I say we, I mean humans in general, we are blinded towards our sin. We are blinded towards bad things. We think everything's just hunky-dory and great, but Yahweh sees above, and he knows that isn't true, so he gives the prophet. Samuel hears the prophet. Samuel confirms, or Yahweh confirms Samuel's prophecy, and he continues to confirm Samuel's prophecy. He revealed himself to Samuel as Yahweh, and he then puts forth Samuel before Israel as Yahweh's prophet. Samuel's words came to all Israel is the last section of what should be chapter 3. And this is the last time. This is the last time we hear about Samuel until chapter 7. So chapters 4, 5, and 6, 3 chapters. Samuel's not mentioned at all, and it shouldn't surprise us that everything's basically bad in those 5 chapters. Chapter 6, you get the return of the ark, but still, they're not listening to the prophet. They're not listening to Yahweh, and for that, disaster comes. This time, it is in the form of the Ark of the Covenant being taken away from them. How in the world could that happen? Well, that happens whenever Israel fights against the Philistines, and they suffer defeat because they're not listening to Yahweh on the front ends, And then they think instead of consulting Yahweh and asking him what we should do, maybe we should call the prophet Samuel to see what he has to say. No, forget that. Let's just go ahead and go snatch the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh and take it into battle with us, because hey, it's worked before, and hey, this is the sign of God's presence with us. It's a good luck charm. It's a lucky rabbit's foot. There's no way Yahweh would allow an army of his people carrying forth his ark to be defeated. There's no way. He can't let that happen. Except he does. Because they tried to force God's hand. And God's hand will not be forced. He is in control. They cannot jerk him around and use what belongs to him and what represents his presence as some sort of bargaining chip, or like I said, a lucky rabbit's foot. It's so interesting to see the reversal of verses 6 through 9 to what is said in verse number 13. 6 through 9, or I guess it's 3 parts. First part is there's a great shout in the Israelite camp. They feel encouraged. Verses 6 through 9, there's a panic and a shouting of we're going to die from the Philistines, who obviously don't have a good grasp on the oneness of Yahweh, that he is not a plurality, but that he is a single God. That's why they refer to him as a God or the gods. They're just mistaken because of their polytheistic worldview with which they see things. But then there's a victory, and the people at Shiloh, whenever they hear what has happened, what's taking place, they now cry out. So there's cries of encouragement from Israel. There's cries of despair from the Philistines. But it ends with a cry of despair for Israel again, because they did not consult Yahweh. They try to do things on their own. Eli hears about this. He's already worried about the ark. He's still somewhat perceptive, it seems. Even though his eyesight is completely gone at this point, he's still somewhat perceptive. And once he hears that the Ark of the Covenant has been captured, he is so distraught by that he falls backwards and he dies. Oh, by the way, I missed the fact that in this battle, where the Ark did not do them any good, 30,000 people died, 30,000 soldiers died, including Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Both that and then Eli's death, which not specifically Eli's death, but just the disaster of the family and the disaster in Israel, all of that is traced back to chapter 2, specifically verse number 32, where it says that you will see distress in the place of worship. No, that's not right. Let's see. Verse 34, excuse me. This will be the sign that will come to you concerning your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, that they have been rejected because their evil wickedness, both of them will die on the same day. That's exactly what happened. Not only that, but we see as well in verse number, verse number 32, whenever it comes to Ark of the Covenant, you will see distress in the place of worship, in spite of all that is good in Israel, and no one in your family will ever reach old age. So here you will see you will see distress in the place of worship. Yeah, because the ark's gone. So all these things that are prophesied previously in chapter 2, and again, we're not exactly sure how long that is prior to the events of chapters 3 and 4. But regardless of how long it is, God made it. God said it's going to happen. And certainly it came true. God keeps his promises. You reject him, you ignore him, you spit in his face, try to take his honor and disgrace him in the way Hophni and Phinehas had done, and yeah, you're going to suffer. And unfortunately, they did. But you know who suffered as well? The wife of Phinehas. But you know who else suffered too? This poor little baby. This poor little baby who's born during this horrible time. And he's given a name like Ichabod or Ichabod. Not a southern tongue. This poor child, his name is Where is Glory? It means where is glory? Why that? Because the glory was not in Israel. The glory was not in Israel because the ark had been captured. I appreciate again what one writer said. He said the glory had already departed. which is what allowed the ark to be captured in the first place. It wasn't, and that, I believe that is an accurate interpretation of this scene. It wasn't that God had been defeated while he was fully engaged in this battle. No. Whenever God is fully engaged, you win. That's guaranteed. There is no losing whenever Yahweh is fully engaged and fighting on your side. But here, because God was not fully engaged, because they did not care about him, because they were not worried about consulting him, because the very priests themselves were taking his sacrifices and sleeping with the women who were in service to the temple, to the tabernacle, God's presence was nowhere to be found. And he was not going to be jerked around by these people. So yeah, the representation of Yahweh's presence might now be gone. But Yahweh's presence itself had been gone long before. And how sad that is. How very sad that is. Here within the story, again, whenever you mess around, whenever you don't consult Yahweh, whenever you're not concerned for him, and then you want to turn around and try to use him and his name and his power and his presence to aid you, that's only going to ruffle Yahweh's feathers even more. That's only going to make him more upset and cause the consequences to be that much worse. So let's think about that for ourselves. We cannot just run around and serve ourselves and then think in a pinch whenever something's going wrong that, oh, now I need to turn to God. No. We need to repent. We need to just stop our foolishness and repent. Then turn to Yahweh and beg for his mercy and beg for his forgiveness and not think that we can simply use him as some kind of good luck charm, or because I say the name of Jesus, or because I claim God's power in a situation in my life that's going to work just because I do it. No. We need to submit first and then allow God's power to be present and work in our lives in whatever way he sees that to be necessary. So here within the story, we're in a place right now where things are looking really bad. And that's because they've rejected God. Eventually, things are going to turn around. And Samuel is certainly going to play a big part in that as we continue on through the text. I appreciate so much you tuning in for this reading today here in 1 Samuel chapters 3 and 4. We'll be reading chapters 5 and 6 tomorrow, where the Philistines continue to have the ark, and some pretty funny stuff happens actually in the temple of Dagon that we looked at with Samson's story. It's pretty funny. I get a chuckle every time I read this text in chapter 5. And then we'll see the ark being returned in chapter 6 as well. Again, I appreciate you tuning in for this reading. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below, and I'll address that as best I can. And I hope that you'll tune in again tomorrow as we read together again in chapters 5 and 6, and hope to see you tonight for our continued studies with Brother Jim Jonas. Great start yesterday. Really looking forward to our continued studies with him. Take care, and God bless.